A deeply spiritual act intrinsically linked to the reality of spiritual warfare. Through the discipline of fasting, undertaken in dependence upon God, the believer actively engages in the cosmic battle described by the Apostle Paul, a battle waged not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Ephesians 6, verse 12. Fasting is a potent weapon forged in the furnace of self-denial and yielded humility, wielded most effectively by those who grasp that the primary battlefield is not external but internal, within the mind, the will, and the spirit. The church is meant to be on the offensive, storming the very gates of hell, which Jesus promised would not prevail against his advancing church. Matthew 16:18. Gates in the ancient world were defensive mechanisms, not offensive. Paul underscores the nature of this conflict and our weaponry. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in our union with God, for the pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself up against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. And when you take something captive, you take it by force. 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5. Fasting stands as one of these primarily not carnal weapons, mighty in our union with God for this essential demolition work. Weapons not carnal, pulling down strongholds. Strongholds in this Pauline context are not physical fortresses, but deeply entrenched mental and spiritual fortifications of the enemy within our minds and hearts and in the unseen realm. They are built from lies we have believed, sinful habits we protect and rationalize, fears we entertain instead of trusting in God, bitterness we nurse, and wounds we refuse to bring to the healer. These spiritual citadels, these arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself up against the knowledge of God cannot be dismantled by human willpower, psychological techniques, or intellectual reasoning. Their demolition requires spiritual weapons provided by God and fueled by His power. Fasting emerges as a key weapon in this arsenal. When we fast with the right heart, seeking God, humbling ourselves, repenting, we engage our whole being, body, soul, spirit, in a decisive act of submission to the Lordship of Christ Almighty. This intentional weakening of the flesh clarifies the mind, often clouded by physical appetites and worldly distractions. Prayer becomes sharper, more focused, and more desperate. The will subjected to the Holy Spirit's control rather than the flesh's demands. Strengthened in its resolve toward God. In the act of fasting, we are in effect serving notice to the enemy. You will no longer govern my appetites. You will no longer dictate my thoughts. You will no longer rule over my emotions. Christ is Lord here. Paul's call to bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ is not a suggestion for passive reflection. It is a command for active, even violent spiritual engagement. It involves identifying thoughts rooted in fear, pride, lust, unbelief, or deception, and forcibly subjecting them to the truth of Christ as revealed in Holy Writ. It means tearing down those proud imaginations and arguments that contradict God's reality. Fasting provides a crucial context for this battle. As the clamor of the flesh is subdued, the spiritual fog begins to lift. God shines the piercing light of His truth into the hidden corners of our minds and hearts, exposing the enemy's deceptive strategies and illuminating the path of obedience. It is a process where, through surrender, we cooperate with the Holy Spirit in the demolition of these internal and spiritual forces. Confronting demonic influence, this kind comes out only by prayer and fasting. Mark chapter 9. The Gospels record a stark instance, highlighting the connection between fasting and overcoming specific demonic powers. In Mark 9, after the transfiguration, Jesus and the inner circle descended the mountain of transfiguration to find the other disciples unable to cast an unclean spirit out of a boy who had suffered terribly since childhood. The disciples, who had previously been sent out with authority to heal and cast out demons, Mark 6, verse 7 and 13, were powerless in this situation, leading to arguments with the scribes and distress for the boy's father. After the father's desperate plea and declaration of faith, "I believe, help my unbelief," Jesus decisively rebukes the spirit, commanding it to leave the boy permanently, and the boy is healed. Notice in this text that the father tells Jesus when he comes down and asks about the commotion, "I brought my son to you." Yet Jesus was on the mountain, and the father brought the boy to his disciples. Later, when the disciples asked Jesus privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" his response was direct and sobering. This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. This encounter reveals critical truths. Firstly, there are degrees of spiritual opposition. Some demonic influences are more deeply entrenched, more resistant, hence this kind. Secondly, while the disciples had been given authority, certain manifestations of demonic power required a deeper level of spiritual preparation and dependence upon God, facilitated specifically by the combination of prayer and fasting. Jesus himself modeled this reliance, often withdrawing to pray and demonstratively engaging in fasting. Jesus often went without food. Luke chapter 4, 1 and 2. His ability to cast out the spirit stemmed from his perfect communion and dependence upon the Father, a state cultivated through such disciplines. Because in the incarnation, Jesus set aside his divine prerogatives, fully man, fully God. Truly man, truly God. Fasting was joined with fervent prayer. Fasting, when joined with fervent prayer, appears to release a heightened measure of divine authority necessary to disrupt and dislodge particularly stubborn demonic activity. It achieves this, in part, by weakening the flesh, the sarx nature, which can provide hostile ground or points of entry for demonic influence. Simultaneously, it sharpens spiritual discernment and strengthens our alignment with the will and power of God. As we humble ourselves and draw near to God through fasting, our spiritual authority, derived entirely from our union with Christ, is magnified and made more effective in confronting the powers of darkness. Deliverance itself is described biblically as a curing or healing, indicating the restoration of wholeness, body, soul, and spirit, that occurs when demonic oppression is broken through the power of Christ, accessed through faith, prayer, and significantly, fasting. Breaking the bonds of wickedness, Isaiah 58, perhaps the clearest Old Testament exposition of fasting as active spiritual warfare, is found in Isaiah 58. Here, God directly confronts Israel's hypocritical fasting performed as an outward ritual aimed at self-benefit or impressing God and others, while neglecting justice and mercy. He then powerfully redefines the fast that truly pleases him, the fast that he himself has chosen. Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens or straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Isaiah 58:6. This is not the language of passive piety. It is the language of active liberation and spiritual assault. God declares that the fast he desires is one that directly confronts and dismantles the works of the enemy. Among other things, Jesus' ministry was a confrontation with evil forces. Notice the active verbs loose, undo, let go, be free, break. This kind of fasting isn't merely about resisting evil personally. It actively participates in the strength of God's might in breaking evil's grip on others. Biblical fasting, rooted in humility and expressed in righteousness, becomes a spiritual weapon that shatters chains of wickedness, lifts crushing spiritual burdens, liberates those oppressed by demonic forces, often manifesting as the troubling of the mind, and breaks every